The day was February 14th, 2016.
The end of the world will be on February 14th in the year 2016.
Valentine's Day. Bummer.
Sony Pictures Home Entertainment made 6 releases for their new format, the Ultra High Definition Blu-ray. These consisting of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, Salt, Hancock, Chappie, Pineapple Express, and the Smurfs II. And today we're going to be taking a look at those 6 4Ks and seeing if they were worth it or not. Let's get into this. So yes, today we're going to be talking about the first ever 4K Blu-rays, these 6 initial 4K Blu-rays that were first released, because I remember seeing a lot of reviews back in the day, people saying, oh no, from VHS to DVD was a huge uptick, DVD to Blu-ray was an even bigger uptick in quality, and a lot of people were like, oh, I don't see a difference between Blu-ray and 4K. I mean, there's even people nowadays who say, oh, it's not worth it, I don't see myself upgrading to 4K.
I'd say the money is better spent on almost anything else.
I'm very disappointed in this new format.
I don't think Ultra HD Blu-ray will ever be popular.
So today I'll be taking a look at the initial 6 4K Blu-rays on my updated LG C1, 2021 LG C1, the 65-inch model, and see if it looks good or not. So we have 6 movies here, 6 4Ks, and starting off with The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Now, if you haven't seen that video, I made a video on bad movies with great 4K transfers, and this was on my top list. The Amazing Spider-Man 2, I absolutely hated that movie. It was a terrible movie. I mean, if you like it, God bless you. You can find things out of anything. But I personally, as a Sam Raimi fan, I thought this was a huge departure. It was terrible, and it didn't really do justice to the character. But the 4K did real big justice to the format. I mean, this was one of the very first 4K releases, and I honestly would consider it to be demo quality, especially for early adopters. And what I totally forgot was that The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was shot on 35mm and transferred to 4K, so you do get a very stunning image, and a huge upgrade from the mastered in 4K Blu-ray. Little details like the mesh line in the eyes and fabric stitching all over the costume. You'll even be able to see shadow definition from lighting across the suit, which gives it more depth and richness. Individual strands of locks of hair are easier to see. You'll also be able to see makeup artifacting. The colors also, the HDR on this is absolutely fantastic. The color spectrum, the boldness, the richness of each color is highly upgraded from its 1080p counterpart. The red and blue on the Spider-Man suit is more vibrant and energetic, and it just really pops off the screen, especially when he's swinging from building to building, to even when he's just like standing on the street doing like an action pose. Every color just pops right off the screen, and not even to mention the Dolby Atmos track, the true HD 7.1 mix is absolutely amazing. So my final review for The Amazing Spider-Man 2 on 4K, I would say it's a highly recommend for 4K lovers, but if you're like me, I would say give it a rent. I was able to rent actually all of these. That's why I don't have it with me right now. I was able to rent all of these 4Ks at a video store here in Toronto, so that was really cool. So next we're going to be talking about, so I would say it's a highly recommend based on the image quality, but if you're not a big fan of it, honestly, I wouldn't. Thankfully, I rented it, so I didn't have to buy it for $30. But yeah, now we're gonna be talking about Hancock for some. I don't know why some of these movies were selected, but Hancock was selected for the other 4K Blu-ray release. I was kind of scared because this was filmed weird. This does have that 4K feel though, and it is noticeably sharper than the 1080p counterpart. Details within faces and clothing is nice. You can see pores during close-up scenes and stitch and patchwork on clothing. The shots of scenery look great as well, specifically the cityscapes of LA. When it comes to the HDR though, I was a bit scared, first of all, being that there is this orangish feel, this like orangish overpass feel when it comes like for artistic reasons or something. But like the Matrix, the colors still shine through, especially when it comes to skin tones. The colors have a realistic vibrancy to them, and so you don't have to worry about them being over contrasted, thankfully. You know, black levels are deep, but it does crush detail, I'm not gonna lie. But honestly, when compared to its Blu-ray counterpart from 2008, this is a huge upgrade. Unfortunately, if you are a grain hater, you will not enjoy this transfer, as the grain looks pretty heavy, especially during CGI scenes, because they digitally added more grain to it to make the CGI sit well in the transfer, but it doesn't really work out. It's just really heavy on grain, which I'm not sure why, but I mean, it looks like that, but I'm not too sure. But yeah, so overall, Hancock, I would say it's a okay transfer, but it's definitely not needed. It's not a good movie, and the transfer is a meh. So I can see where people would come from. If that was their first pickup and they were disappointed by that, then yeah, I could see why people wouldn't want to upgrade. But when it comes to the audio, I mean, the Dolby Atmos is pretty good. I mean, dialogue sounds amazing. The depth of voices from upfront and background are distinct. Action scenes will rumble your stereo and make full use of your subwoofer. Overall, the audio is honestly the only good thing about this transfer. Next, we're going to be talking about Salt, the spy action type movie starring Angelina Jolie. I remember this, like all of those advertisements on buses and posters saying "kill Salt." Do you guys remember that? Remember when Salt first came out? They had those. I really liked that advertising campaign, but I never knew it was a movie until like fairly recently. But yes, Salt on 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray. This one was interesting because this was shot on 35mm, like Amazing Spider-Man 2, and it does have a 4K digital intermediate, and it honestly shows as it is a pretty decent upgrade from the 1080p Blu-ray when it comes to detail and overall image definition. But there are some scenes that do look softer and can be chopped up to more of the filmmaking style instead of the actual 4K transfer itself. But overall, I mean, hard edges and lines are crisper. Things such as buildings and cars have a tighter feel to them as opposed to the 1080p transfer, which kind of looked flat and dull. And honestly, what amazed me was that the action is really bad. I mean, it's shaky camera, Jason Bourne type, but honestly, you were still able to make out what was going on, and there were still some really crispy edges and lines that you can still make out detail, which I was intensely surprised about. Things like clothing have great detail in it, stitching, patchwork on Salt's many outfits that she wears to blend in are discernible from each other. Things such as wrinkles and folds and patchwork is all full of detail. Close-ups on faces look great, and overall, when it comes to the image, this 4K is quite stellar. When it comes to the HDR, the black levels are inky, and it still does retain detail, so there is no crush when it comes to that. Salt's black coat, you still have visible creases and folds, so there's still detail when it comes to black levels. Even her hair, you're still going to be able to see the individual strands of hair when light shines on it, and you can see frays and stuff, flyaways and stuff. So that looks really cool. Being that this transfer did receive a new color grading from its 1080p counterpart, and overall, honestly, it looks okay. There wasn't that much of a wide color gamut to make full use of things. But there is things like, neon signs of the police sirens. Blood is pretty rich and red. Explosions look good. But that's basically it. So talking about the audio, the Dolby Atmos and DTS-X sound great. From the little details that set up a scene to big subwoofer testing action scenes, the audio is great. Overall, it's a good looking transfer. It's just it's a boring movie, and it's not worth. If you can get it for like less than $10 maybe, but I honestly didn't like the movie. I would say it's not even demo quality, so I'd say you should just pass on this. Finally, we're gonna be talking about an actual good movie, Chappie. Chappie was directed by the guy who made District 9, I believe, and I actually love that movie. I saw it in theaters, and I absolutely fell in love with this movie. I liked there's humor, there's cool action, there's a lot of good stuff within this, and but honestly, it was a confusing film for me because it was filmed differently. It was filmed very weirdly, because on one hand, there were certain scenes that were filmed with a 1080p DSLR, but then there's also certain scenes that are filmed with like a professional red camera in 4 and 5K, and was finished with a 4K digital intermediate. But honestly, for what it was, it does feel like an improvement over its 1080p counterpart. But there are scenes where it was filmed in full HD, which are very noticeable. Lines are soft and flat and dull when compared to the 4K and 5K scenes. You know, things like police robots and some wide shots of scenery look very dull and very soft. But for the most part, I would say that this 4K transfer, besides those things, is damn near demo quality, especially for 2016 standards. I mean, there is great detail when it comes to close-ups, as well as mid-range shots. Detail just pops off the screen, whether it's little wrinkles and freckles, the details on the robots are stunning. I mean, you can see the inner workings of how these machines move, whether it's the pistons, you know, shooting off, or like little subtle things like scratches from wear and tear. That's all visible and it looks really good. Honestly, when it comes to overall 4K image, 4K goodness, this is some pretty good 4K goodness. And when it comes to the color contrast is realistically vibrant without going into that uncanny valley of being over contrasted. You know, audio is also great, sporting an excellent Dolby Atmos track that will immerse you into the movie, with sound coming from all corners, from above, from below, from in front, from behind. It just sounds great. If you have an Atmos setup or even a 7.1 setup, this is definitely a joy for any audiophile. I would say this was a very highly recommended. It's a good movie and a really good looking 4K. Some soft shots from it being filmed for a few scenes. It wasn't that many, but a couple scenes were filmed on a DSLR, which were very obvious, but it honestly doesn't really take away from its entirety. I feel like right now you can get it for like $19 on Amazon Canadian, so it's probably cheaper in the US. I would say I highly recommend it. Next was one of the most puzzling releases. I don't know why this got a 4K, but Pineapple Express. This was released with a coinciding mastered in 4K Blu-ray, 1080p Blu-ray. Unfortunately, I haven't checked that out, but I did compare it to the standard Blu-ray that came with it. I think it's the same thing. I'm not too sure. You know, as Bros Tux calls it, it is a pubic hair sharper when it comes to details such as close-ups, medium shots of scenery. You know, clothing is slightly more sharper than its 1080p Blu-ray counterpart. And the color palette when it comes to HDR is slightly improved, as colors are still more vibrant than the 1080p Blu-ray. But honestly, for a movie of this caliber, does it really, gain anything from having an HDR look and a 4K transfer? Honestly, no. This feels like a movie that you'd be fine watching it on Netflix instead of paying like brand new $35 or $32 for a 4K Blu-ray. It doesn't really need that. When the color palette, it is slightly more improved than the Blu-ray, especially, even for how it's filmed, it doesn't really need it. I mean, it's just shot, reverse shot, someone's talking here, then you see the other guy who's talking from over there. It doesn't really add anything to the 4K. You're not gonna be like, oh wow, look at the detail, look at the HDR goodness. I mean, and especially, I would say it's more vibrant than the 1080p Blu-ray, but compared to the other Blu-rays that I was just talking about prior, it feels a lot more dull and flat compared to the other color gamuts like Amazing Spider-Man 2 or Chappie. And then when it comes to audio, this does sport a 7.1 Dolby Atmos track, but again, I mean, it's dialogue here and there. I mean, there is the fire and explosion at the end of the movie, but I mean, honestly, does it warrant this 4K? No. They should have done so many other. They could have done another movie, but again, Pineapple Express was a very successful movie, and it is within the Sony rights. It is a Sony movie, so yeah, I guess so. It's definitely better than the 1080p like flat front-facing audio. You're still gonna get some spatial audio when it comes to certain things, but honestly, it doesn't really need that. For it being like a comedy, like Judd Apatow type movie, it doesn't really need a 4K. Especially when most of the audio is just dialogue. It just doesn't really lend well to having such an upgrade. Honestly, this is a pass. So you'd rather just watch it on. This is not even worth it on Blu-ray. Honestly, if it's your favorite comedy of all time, yeah, I guess so. But this is more of a stream it on Netflix or something type movie. It's definitely not worth it on physical media in general. And now the final movie on the list, and that is Smurfs 2. And wow, This is possibly the best of all of the 4Ks. Is it the best movie? Hell no. This is not a good movie. This is meant for babies. This is a dumb baby movie. But wow, does this look so good? I mean, honestly, this is simply phenomenal. I mean, the upsurge in color is so vibrant and rich. I mean, the colors are deep and provide a bolder color depth. You know, there's a ton of depth within this picture. There are no issues with any like banding or aliasing or any of that other type of compression problems. You know, this was shot digitally and funnily enough was finished with a 4K digital intermediate. The HDR is just demo quality. I mean, there's also an excellent Dolby Atmos mix as well as a Dolby True HD 7.1 mix. You know, and sometimes when there are CG elements, usually a movie would feel less sharper or less like it would feel very obvious, but this doesn't. This really lends well to, you know, the 4K, and this seems like a movie that would be worth it on 4K. But again, I mean, like, it looks amazing. It's great. It's a damn near demo quality disc, but the movie itself is just so shallow and lacks any reason of, if you're a Smurfs fan from the 80s and you watch this, you're like, oh, what the fuck is this? It's the same thing. Like, but yeah, overall, I would say this would be a soft recommend. I would say it's like a worth a look. It's worth it if, you know, if you're into those movies, if you have a kid or something, maybe, I guess, you know, visually wise, it's great. It's demo quality, but story wise, I mean, because we're not out here buying shitty movies. We want to buy good movies that look good. This is a movie that looks good, but is not very good at all. But overall, I would say my favorite movies out of the initial run would be Chappie, and I guess Amazing Spider-Man 2. Those are the ones that, even if you don't like the movies, it still looks great. But my number one recommend out of the initial 6 is definitely Chappie. That's a great movie with a great looking transfer. I highly recommend it. So that was it. Those were the initial 6 4K Blu-rays. And, you know, when it comes to movies, I would say, you know, it was a weird choice. Spider-Man 2 was definitely a good choice, even though some people really like it, and myself, I don't like it, but I can see why they chose it. It was shot 35mm with a 4K DI, and it looks great. And Chappie looks great. I mean, even though I don't know how well it did in the theaters, but I personally really enjoyed the movie. And it looks great on 4K. Those are the 2 movies that I recommend. If you have an option to buy it for discounted prices, I would highly recommend those. So yeah, that was my video. I'll leave it down below if you've ever checked out those 4K Blu-rays. And yeah, so that was it. I've been Mace from the Mockbuster YouTube channel. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. If you like and subscribe for more 4K Blu-ray goodness, I've been Mason. Thank you so much for watching the video, man. Please have yourself a good day, night, evening, afternoon, morning. Whenever you're watching this, please stay safe and God bless. Cheers, peace, love, and long live physical media.